good afternoon, good evening, whatever fits, and obviously all of that stuff in between. I'm going to apologize pretty much immediately. I'm a little fired up today, so if I get really excited about this stuff, it's just that all of my juices got flowing. This morning I've gotten 3 spam text messages on my phone. It's like, this is not exciting today. But that really isn't, so that in essence sets down a baseline for me then to compare going forward. So what is this whole discussion of benchmarking, and why is it important in terms of Agile? Benchmarking is a search for answers, and perhaps if we get really excited and get really hyperbolic, we might say it's the search for truth. And you can tell I'm a little fired up today. So why are we doing this? We're doing this so that our organizations can get better. And that is really the crux of what I'd like to lay down as sort of a general premise as to why we're talking about benchmarking and why benchmarking is important. Robert Camp uses the phrase search for best practices. And whether we believe that best practices exist, and that's another rant you might get me on, or not, really doesn't matter if you embrace the idea that practices can be modified and can get better. And that, in essence, brings the organization that we're talking about forward. If we look at the quote from Jed Rubin, he sort of echoes in many of the same kind of concepts, but adds the concept of comparison, and that's critical when we talk about a benchmark. A benchmark, when we talk about definitions in a little while, is really a comparison against something. How does benchmarking translate to Agile? Why would Agile make a difference to benchmarking? And do comparisons work in an Agile environment, I think is what the crux of this discussion is all about. Well, as soon as it catches up here, there we go. Let's start with a few slides just of a little bit of drawing a line in the sand. And let's start with the Agile Manifesto. And I think many of us have seen it before, and we've read individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, and all the way through to responding to change over following a plan. And have looked at that, those 4 items that, really are sort of a good set of sound bites that describe Agile. I would, though, suggest that if you really want to get a decent handle on what all of that really means and how you can better instantiate it or apply it in an organization, I think you have to look at the 12 principles. And we're not going to do that now, but in reality, those 12 principles are far more important than any of these 4 sort of dichotomies. And if you want to hear me hold forth on that topic, we can do that in the future. But very frankly, the 12 principles, I would suggest, are part and parcel of why benchmarking, baselining, measuring is all an important concept that can be wrapped up into Agile. So, I mean, in some cases, people have read the manifesto, and it has led them to believe that Agile eschews the whole process. Therefore, benchmarks would have to be passé. Well, maybe not, because I would suggest that Agile doesn't mean ad hoc. It doesn't mean code and run. It doesn't mean no documentation, no discipline, no process, no planning. And it doesn't mean just Scrum either. And since it doesn't mean ad hoc or no processing, benchmarking still makes sense. Just like using measurement and being measured still makes sense. As a matter of fact, I would like to suggest that Agile means that new ideas can be incorporated even faster as you discover them, as you roll them in, or potentially can take a break and do a retrospective in between sprints. Things can change. So benchmarking and having an influx of new ideas still makes a lot of sense. So let's continue with a few more ideas to make sure that we're all on the same page. I would like to suggest to you that Agile has two sides, and that one side of it is predominantly a project management orientation. That project management orientation really is targeted at satisfaction. We'll come back to satisfaction a little later on, but whether that's customer, internal or external, and we can argue over what those words mean, or team level satisfaction, it is more targeted at that level. Whereas the technical side of Agile, things like daily builds, things like automated testing, things like pair programming, are all about efficiency. Agile is more than just a project management construct. Agile extends across the entire life cycle to embrace project management and technical. And therefore, that suggests that, again, we need to be able to assess what techniques within a framework are having an impact on our projects or our environment. So one last line in the sand, one last set of framing discussions, and that is definitions. And I can hear, across the ether here, I can hear everyone go, definitions. But I think they're important. So an assessment, that formal analysis of software development practices against the standard criteria. We can also think of that as an appraisal. So a lot of different words might be used there, assessment, appraisal, but it's a comparison against some sort of standard criteria. A baseline. A baseline, I would suggest, is that line in the sand. It's where we are today, and we know because we can see it. So we've gathered information, we've looked at it, we've drawn that line in the sand. A benchmark is a comparison against something. And whether that's a comparison against a previous project that we've done, a previous sprint that we've done, a previous release, or externally, or both, doesn't matter. It's that comparison, that act of comparison, that makes it a benchmark. We're going to see where we are in comparison to someone else. Now, there are three types of benchmarks, and I think all of them really get us to stop and collaborate and listen. And you can see that wonderful stop sign. My brother actually took a picture of that. I found it on his Facebook page. Somebody had actually amended that stop sign. So that is actually a real life kind of thing. But there are three types of benchmarks or assessments. And that first one is that model-based assessment or appraisal. And those are the kinds of things that we generally see when somebody looks at COBIT or CMMI or ITIL or some other formal standard. It's in a comparison against that standard. Again, all good, all an important part of learning about something, but it's that comparison against the standard. A process, comparison of process, looking at specific processes, comparing how they are done elsewhere, whether elsewhere is 15 cubes down or 3 streets down and to the left, doesn't matter, but we're looking at how someone else does something like we're doing, or something that could be relevant to our learning from it. And then finally, there's a quantitative benchmark. I have a natural sort of bend to really believe in the quantitative side, so we're going to spend some more time in all three of these, but let's discuss how